Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome to Feedvisor webinar. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, my name is Oad Chagai and I'm the VP Marketing at Feedvisor. We are actually hosting between 1 to 2 webinars every month as part of our Ask the Amazon Expert webinars. Today, we are taking a bit different angle and we're lucky to have Jeff Rom, who was the keynote speaker at our recent summit in Orlando in January this year. So most of our webinars are actually very practical to Amazon sellers, how to improve ranking, how to get more buy box, how to improve your profitability. But this time, we are happy to share information which is a bit more on a higher level, but critical to all Amazon sellers and business owners in general. One of the things we have noticed in conferences speaking to many sellers is that sellers are too busy focusing on how they sell on Amazon, improving the metrics, and they forget that at the end of the day, you guys are selling to real customers. And in today's conversation, we're going to learn more about millennials, which most likely are responsible for a big share of your sales on Amazon. Jeff has been studying the millennials generation for a while, and he's going to share his perspective today and some best practices to talk with this generation and being able to communicate with them in a better way. Before we start, we have a new thing in our webinars when we survey the people on the webinar, and it's interesting for all of you to know the sellers that are part of this webinar today. So we're going to launch with a quick 3 questions that you're going to see on your screen. You'll be able to pick your options, and of course we're going to share the results with you right now in real time. I should also say that this webinar is going to be recorded and going to be shared at the end of the webinar, so no needs to take notes. And then the last thing, we're going to have a live Q&A section at the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them through the dashboard of the GoToMeeting that you have on your screen right now. So let's kick off the first question we have to the poll to get to know our audience better. The first question we have is about private label. And you should have it right now on your screen. As you can see, the question is, are you a private label seller? Please pick the option from the screen. We're going to share now the results with all of you. You see many people voting. We'll give a few more seconds to vote. Okay, so from what we are seeing, about 50% of the attendees today do over 50% of their business from private label, and another 33% of the attendees on this webinar today don't do private label at all. The rest are doing less than 50% private label. Interesting stats. That's actually reflecting the trend that we are seeing today on Amazon. Moving on to the next question. Do you use FBA? So same concept, over 50% of my business is fulfilled by FBA, less than 50%, or I do not use FBA at all. Please go ahead and vote for what you're doing. Okay, many people are voting, and I see that many people are still signing up for the webinar. Okay, so from those who vote, which is actually 95% of the people on this webinar, 21% do not do FBA at all. 65% of you are getting 50% of your business is fulfilled, over 50% of your business is fulfilled by FBA. Again, reflecting the trend that we are seeing with Amazon. And we are going to move on to the next question. And this is the last question before we're going to kick off this webinar. what is your Amazon annual sales volume? And you see the option below: half a million to a million, million to 5 million, and over 5 million. So please go ahead and vote your option. It's your annual Amazon sales volume. And still many people are voting. Okay, so not surprising, the majority of the Amazon sellers on today's webinar are making below $500,000 a year. So 60% mentioned they're making below $500,000 a year. 20% are making $500,000 to $1 million a year, and 14% are making over $5 million a year. Lucky sellers. Sorry, not lucky. I should say smart sellers. Good for you guys. Okay, so now that we went through that part, we all know which people are attended today's webinar. A reminder before we kick off: you have a question dashboard. Feel free to submit questions. We're going to have a live Q&A toward the end of the webinar, where we're going to take and cover these questions that you guys submitted. So with no further ado, Jeff, let's kick off your presentation. And I think the best thing to do is if you'll start by introducing yourself.
Thank you. My name's Jeff Fromm. I am president at FutureCast and the author of a couple of books on marketing to millennials. We're going to do three things over the course of this presentation. First, talk about a few of the myths regarding millennials. Second, discuss a framework for thinking about the financial impact of millennial influence across generations. So that's millennial influence on baby boomers, Gen X, and other millennials. And then finally, share some examples of trends that you should be aware of and brands that are getting it right. So with that, let's start with the myths. Not all millennials are broke, unemployed, looking for a job, living in their parents' basements among a collection of participation trophies that they've never effing earned. It's not a very healthy way to think about 82 million consumers born between 77 and 97, and it's not very accurate. What I'd like to do is peel back the onion a little bit and look at our study of affluent millennials. Affluent millennials are trendsetters. They're 2.5 to 3 times more likely to be early adopters of new digital, social, and mobile platforms. They're able to afford to buy the items they want to buy and do the things that they want to do. This group skews female significantly. 60% of affluent millennials are female, which means 60% of the people making over $100,000 in the cohort are women. We're talking about something in the neighborhood of 10 million millennials. The fastest growing group of people making $250,000 or more in the United States are millennials living in the top 10 urban markets. So important to understand what this group is doing, because other millennials are going to be more interested in what they're doing as their income starts to rise. You can get a free copy of the Affluent Millennial Report at millennialmarketing.com on the Research tab. I suspect most of you had Maslow in your past. Maslow was a great 1940s thinker. Maslow did not understand millennials would definitely trade out their water in favor of their Wi-Fi. That's right. Millennials are not going to give up their Wi-Fi. This is a mobile-first culture. If you're not thinking mobile-first as you think about their behavior and how they engage with your brands, you're going to lose. This just-in-time buyer wants just-in-time service, just-in-time content, and that's the expectation they have. Amazon is definitely feeding that expectation. So now we've briefly talked about a few of the myths, right? So I'd like to shift the conversation to a topic of money. Oh, did I say money? I mean love. A topic of love. The brand love topic, that is. The most profitable brands on our planet are the most loved brands. They sustain interest for long periods of time by being willing to give up equity they have in an old schema in favor of a new schema. So when someone starts using your products or services, they're dating your brand. And when they repeat purchase, they're starting to show more affection. And when they purchase a third or a fourth time, they're showing more affection. Your challenge is to continue to be innovative in order to make sure they don't get bored, because it's very easy to find direct and indirect alternatives and switch. In fact, think about the grocery store. I could move 2 feet down the aisle in any grocery store and not only find 40 choices of ketchup, I could move out of the ketchup category altogether in flavor of Tabasco sauce or hot sauce or salsas. So we need to pay attention to competitive trends. We peeled the onion back on the love topic and started looking at profits a little bit to understand what was driving extraordinary profits. Next slide, Leah. The profits are driven by 3 primary factors for most brands. They are uniqueness, innovation, and meaningfulness. Uniqueness is a proxy for pricing authority. The more unique your brand is, the more pricing authority your brand will have. Second, innovation. Innovation is the glue that consumers expect from brands. And third is meaningfulness. Meaningfulness will be a proxy for sales volume potential. So the more unique your brand is, the more meaning your brand creates, sales volume potential follows. If you're interested in meaningfulness, I point to our research. If you're interested in the topic of uniqueness, I point you to the work done by Young Mi Moon at Harvard Business School. The reality is these numerator factors are going to be more important, we think, than the denominator factors of people being aware of your brand and guest satisfaction. Those are still important, but the drivers are going to be in the numerator. So with that, let's move forward and take a look at the 6 millennial mindsets that are impacting consumers' attitudes. We did a study between FutureCast, the company that I manage, Barkley, an ad agency that's our corporate parent, and the Cambridge Group. And we wanted to look at separating basically stated importance from derived importance. So we studied consumers, we looked at retailing, we looked at food, we looked at apparel, we looked at category after category. We found that 75% of financial performance was related to pricing strategy, promotion strategy, and distribution strategies. If you're competing on low price, 75% goes to about 82%. If you're competing on differentiation, 75% drops to about 67%. So on average, the majority of your performance is related to core strategic choices. The rest of your performance is related to the 6 millennial mindsets. These are mindsets that are started with millennial trends and behaviors that affect Gen X and baby boomers. We did study consumers age 18 to 65. And these mindsets are going to be covered in order of importance, starting with social circle all the way to accessible. So social circle is number 1, accessible is number 6 in order of importance, and they account for that percentage that I've described. On average, about 25% of your profit performance, the rest being pricing, promotion, distribution strategies, things like that. All right, let's talk about social circle first. Social circle is that your brand is part of cultural conversations. Next slide, please. Thank you. Cultural conversations. So as an example, I live in a suburb of Kansas City, and I'm at a cocktail party, and people are talking about a grocery store. And I'm thinking, isn't it kind of strange that I'm at a cocktail party and people are having a whole conversation about a grocery store? But Trader Joe's has a very strong social circle, and it's part of cultural conversations. So it's not that surprising. Likewise, I have a daughter who works in San Francisco in the tech industry. She's at a company called Pinterest. And Pinterest has a very strong social circle among women 40 and 50 years old. So Pinterest isn't millennial by birth year, but clearly millennial by mindset in terms of people being interested in their brand. So social circle and your brand's participation in cultural conversations was number 1. And if your brand gets this, that means you're going to get word of mouth and word of mouth. Number 2 was self. Self is the emotional connection consumers have with your brand. So let's take a couple of examples. The coffee economy, remarkably strong in the United States. Per capita consumption, flat as a bone. It is totally flat. Having said that, consumers are going from paying 50 cents to $4 because they have an experience that they're paying for, and the coffee economy goes up by an 8 times market cap. So consumers are having an emotional connection to Starbucks, Dunkin', Wawa, or their favorite brand and willing to pay a premium for that. Or we could look at the emotional connection consumers have to Red Bull. Most Red Bull users don't jump out of buildings in sky suits, but they aspire to an adventure brand, and Red Bull is that adventure ethos brand. So number 2, self, emotional connection consumers have with your brand. Number 3 is innovative. The most innovative brands on the planet win again and again and again. Innovation is crucial to being successful. If I'd only understood my daughter a little better, I had no idea she was willing to pay anyone to do chores for her. Certainly not when she lived at home with me. TaskRabbit understands there's a marketplace between buyer and seller, and they have managed to extract revenue from her when she has to do work and doesn't have time to take care of a chore. Likewise, Topgolf is a brand that is about a $12 million+ restaurant in the golf space where people, quote, have given up on golf, but they haven't. Topgolf has reimagined what golf is in a format that's conversational, social, includes alcohol, loud music, and for $100, you can have a great hour-and-a-half experience, as opposed to spending $75 and having an experience where you have to talk real quietly and everyone's sort of uptight about how you're playing. So Topgolf has given up all the equity around what a golf experience should be and imagined a very different golf experience, and they're winning. Fourth on the list is trusted. Trusted is important in the sense that it's brands doing what they said they could do and being remarkably consistent in that. For most brands, you must get to a threshold level to be considered. So if your trust scores are below the threshold, you're not going to be considered for the purchase. But for most brands, getting beyond the threshold level does not yield incremental profits. So it's typically about understanding what performance level your brand must hit in order to be considered and playing to that level, not over-investing or under-investing in this particular area. Fifth is purposeful. I'm fine if you want to use the term meaningful in lieu of purposeful. I'm going to use those terms interchangeably. Purposeful or meaningful brands create sales volume potential because today's modern consumer expects that. Couple of simple stories. One, Bain Capital was looking at buying a brand called Tom's. It's a one-for-one brand. They started a movement about buying one, they give one away. We were asked via LinkedIn to engage in a small project, which we did. And our analysis was fairly simple. Tom's purpose gene is incredibly strong. But the reality is getting incremental improvement on that gene does not lead to incremental profits, in our opinion, for Tom's, because they're already getting full credit from consumers for it. So they're going to have to grow in other areas in order to maximize their opportunity. Likewise, brands like AT&T, and I know none of you have ever hated on a cable company or phone company, I'm sure that's never happened, have a lot of opportunity on the purpose gene, which is to say they hug a trend around don't text and drive, a pain point that is fairly obvious that had been ignored. And they get a lot of credit and create a lot of headroom around that. So all of this gets back to understanding where you are in the consideration set and where to place your bets. The final, and I don't want to minimize important point on this, would be around accessible. Accessible brands are radically simplifying. And the truth is, even though accessible is number 6 on the list, many of the highest performing brands are very accessible. They're radically easy to use. Accessible is all about simplifying my life. We studied hundreds of brands among thousands of consumers across Generation X, baby boomers, and millennials. The number 1 brand of all brands across all generations is Amazon. Amazon, number 1. Why? Because it's a radically easy to use brand. And if you can simplify people's lives, whether we're talking about Uber, Airbnb, Netflix, etc., you're going to win big. So it's important to understand that, and I'm going to come back to this, Amazon is affecting people's views across other industries in terms of their expectation for your ability to be simple to work with, simple to use as a brand. So we've talked about the myths, and now we've talked a little bit about these mindsets, and you understand that the mindsets on average account for about 25% of financial performance. The rest is pricing strategy, promotion strategy, and distribution strategy. I'd like to shift gears and share some examples of brands that are winning and how they're doing it around thematic trends we see in our data. And let's go to the first trend. The first trend is all about standing for more. Standing for more than your bottom line. Because today's consumer expects that, and the truth is today's employees expect that. You must be a conscious capitalist brand. It's okay to earn a profit, but you have to do it in a way where your employees, your vendors, and your communities love your brand, because then you're going to get their word of mouth. You're going to also get their loyalty in terms of them working for you longer, and you're going to get their passion. Couple of quick points. Having a conversation with a friend of mine who's a neighbor. He's about 58, and his son's about 28. And his son works at the exchange desk at Costco on the weekend. And I say to my neighbor, you know, I love shopping at Costco. And his son enters the conversation, and he says, you know, the only thing better than shopping at Costco is working for Costco. So that kind of passion from someone who works at the exchange desk on the weekend is what translates to consumers who are engaging with people at your businesses in terms of the kinds of interactions that you want them to feel. You want them to feel that kind of passion and love. So with that in mind, I want to shift back to the marketing equation, the marketing side, and tell you that brand positioning as a be-all, end-all endpoint is not going to be enough for most brands. Most brands are going to have to do more than position their brand effectively. They're going to have to engage in active proof. They're going to have to actually live their story. They're going to have to provide evidence to consumers who expect brands to do more than tell a story, but to actually live their story. And by living your story, you're going to deliver that evidence to a consumer who expects it. So it's a very different schema. For the last 4 or 5 decades, the most successful large brands on the planet were storyteller brands. And they were iconic storyteller brands. I think the most successful brands in the future are going to be disruptor brands, and they're going to be active proof story living brands, which is a very different model. Storytelling is a subset of the model as opposed to the focus of the model. So with that in mind, a simple example I want to share is Tesla. Tesla is a very high performing brand. They provide active proof to their brand fans. That proof came recently when Tesla took their patents and made them available to the good faith use of their direct and indirect competitors. An unheard of type action from a major brand, but it's active proof from a CEO who understands their consumers want active proof. The second thematic trend I'd like to cover is adventure. Adventure is a huge trend for this consumer. And the vast majority of brands underestimate how important adventure is to their brand. Today's modern consumer wants to know that the brands they're engaging with and the purchases they make are a modern day status symbol. If we have an amazing dinner tonight and it doesn't go on my Instagram account, did the dinner even exist? And if I buy some new electronics and they're really cool and I don't post about it, did the purchase even take place? Today's modern consumer needs to feel like your brand is helping them curate their status. And that's hard to do because it means you're going to have to integrate the physical world and the digital world in a way that empowers them to do that. But when you do that, you're going to get a lot of macro tailwinds around other consumers seeing that action. They're also collecting experiential currency. They want to take in everything life has to offer. And this currency is, in fact, part of what they want from brands. They don't only want status symbol brands anymore. They want experiences. They want to buy things that enable those experiences. So to the extent that you think about it through that lens, you're going to be riding that tailwind. And the adventure theme is a theme that's been consistent in this study since late 2010. So it's a macro trend. If you're not thinking about this trend, give it some serious thought because it's a very important one. The third example or area that I would like to get into today is around culture of content. Culture of content is important to understand because today's consumer is a just-in-time buyer. And they want just-in-time content from their brands, from their favorite brands. They want to get information from those brands and they want to receive it to that modern day Swiss Army knife. It's not a phone. There's no millennial who's going to call you back. It's a tool that allows them to crowdsource information from lots of sources right before they buy. And the most effective brands understand that this content empowers the purchaser and it builds on loyalty. So it's important to give a consideration to the types of content someone would need right before they make a purchase during the purchase cycle, and right after a purchase, and to imagine what various different types of buyers are going to want in the way of information. With that in mind, we outlined thinking around a content strategy matrix, a 2x2 matrix where we look at planned and unplanned and proactive and reactive scenarios. And most brands can think of the most common scenarios. What are the common complaints? What are the common questions? What are the common opportunities to provide inspirational content on a proactive basis? So if you think about it through the lens of finding predictable patterns and having content that's available for that just-in-time buyer, this matrix will be very helpful. And it's a tool that allows you to start to dig in and create content ahead of the predictable complaint or the predictable question or the predictable opportunity to inspire a buyer. Next is frictionless journey. Frictionless journey is a huge, huge topic. I can tell you that there's an awful lot of friction. Now, Amazon does a better job than most brands taking friction out of the process. I'm an avid traveler. I travel quite a bit for work. I have a Marriott app on my phone. I have a Marriott credit card in my wallet. And yet every time I check into Marriott, they want me to spend 5 or 7 minutes filling out paperwork, showing them a driver's license. We could have geofenced the Marriott hotel back in 2009. And we could have saved them money to serve me and increased my guest experience. So I need you to think about the friction that is in that journey and how you can take friction out or inspire post-purchase joy so that the consumer who has made this purchase can fully act on their attitudes in favor of your business. The friction thing is where the big disruptors come in, of which Amazon is one, Airbnb is one, Uber is one. Many of the high-performing brands today are disruptor brands that are attacking friction points. The next thematic trend I'd like to get into is around peer affirmation. Peer affirmation is a big topic. Today's buyer does not need the Kelley Blue Book to buy a car. Today's buyer merely needs their friend network. And their friend network can inspire them whether they're purchasing electronics, wine, apparel, shoes, or any category. The key thing to understand is the friend network will vary from category to category and from channel to channel. And for each one of these topics, the type of content that you would need to have available in order to exceed the expectations of this consumer would be different. So today's modern consumer trusts their friends, and getting people on board in favor of your brand, in favor of supporting your brand, will absolutely help your brand gain momentum. The next topic I want to hit on is transparency. I suspect it's a topic you've heard quite a bit about. Truth is, when millennials have children, they're going to be less likely to share private information, but the transparency topic isn't just about the private information sharing. It's also about your philosophy as a business in terms of sharing information about what you're doing. A simple example is the one that you see here for Everlane, where they share information on their pricing model in an attempt to be more transparent with consumers about their ecosystem and about how come they charge what they charge. It's a fairly novel approach for a brand that is trying to win consumers over by behaving differently. I have a couple of additional examples I'd like to get into. I'm going to come back to the point around innovation again. Hacking culture is part of millennial culture, and innovation comes from that hacking culture. They're always looking to solve for improvements and make things better. This fella, he's my #1 draft choice, and I've signed him. The reality is, when it comes to innovation, I want you to take a portfolio approach to your business. I want you to think about blue ocean or disruptive innovation, and I want you to think of sustaining innovation, and I want to separate those into 2 buckets. And you can make 95% of your bets, if you'd like, on sustaining and 5% on blue ocean or disruptive. Sustaining innovation should use rational ROI metrics and scalability as guiding posts. Hey, we're going to introduce this new service. We'll come out with it in 9 months. We've tested it, we've made modifications based on what we've learned, and we're rolling forward. Disruptive or blue ocean innovation requires a different approach. There are two questions you must ask and answer. First, is this idea consistent with our brand authority? Second, can you afford to make the bet? If you get a yes, yes, don't use the same financial models, don't use the same rules for your blue ocean thinking. It's not going to work out. All you're going to do is make no-go decisions. There's no doubt that people in Boston working for Gillette probably had insights and information to move forward on something like Dollar Shave Club at least a year or two before Dollar Shave Club. But they don't take a portfolio approach. They have a lot of equity in an old distribution model, and so they get disrupted from a competitor that they probably could have predicted would exist. So there's lots of opportunity in this space as long as you understand that your innovation portfolio must be separated and managed through very different processes with different financial modeling based on where in the portfolio you're working. At the root of innovation is empathy. Empathy is understanding frustrations, joys, pains, and everything else. And it's understanding the interconnectivity of those. It's so frustrating to me when I walk into a hotel and Marriott says, go through this dance. It's like, I stayed at Marriott 75 nights last year. You don't know me as a customer, even though I spend thousands and thousands of dollars with your brand. So understanding empathy points is crucial, and getting to empathy points means unlearning what your mother taught you. Because your mother, if she's like mine, taught you the golden rule. Unfortunately, the golden rule is not going to work real well when it comes to innovation. You're going to want to learn a new rule. It's called the platinum rule. The platinum rule is that you're going to treat others as they want to be treated, which is completely different than treating others as you wish to be treated, and requires that you learn something about the customer and retain what you learned in order to better serve them. Because there are customers who do want different experiences. I'd like to get into something now around the new selling model. The new selling model is definitely a major change for those of you who've been familiar with, quote, the ABCs. The ABCs in the past stood for always be closing. The ABCs in Tomorrowland do not stand for always be closing. Rather, they stand for always be collaborating or always be helping. Those are the new ABCs, always be collaborating or always be helping. And great brands need to understand that they're going to move from a model of being a gatekeeper to being a trusted advisor. That's the role someone has when they have a sales role in the Tomorrowland around how brands are going to participate in this kind of a sales cycle. It requires that you're going to know more information about consumer trends and about how to act on those aspirations than ever before. For example, just because somebody sells me jewelry doesn't mean their job ends with the sale of the product. They need to be able to inspire me on how to have a great proposal experience or how to have the ultimate Valentine's Day gift experience. Their job is beyond selling me information on a product. Their job is to inspire me and be a trusted advisor. That's a very different job than the role historically played by sales. And to deliver that online may even be harder. The good news is if you crack the code, you will have some really secret sauce related to the product set that you have. And then next I want to get into the Amazon effect. Amazon, as I mentioned earlier in this conversation, was the most powerful brand we found in our study. It was absolutely shocking that consumers age 60 and consumers age 25 preferred this brand over all other brands. Might be shocking, not shocking to you since you're all successful Amazon resellers, but it was a little surprising to us that it was stronger than a variety of other brands like Apple, like Uber, etc. So the Amazon effect is tricky because the Amazon effect is about consumers' expectations being driven and changing in favor of constant innovation, constant improvements in speed, constant decreases in costs of delivery, the ability to get what I want when I want. And the evolution of Amazon looks remarkably like the evolution in terms of consumers' expectations changing more rapidly than ever before. And it's going to be up to you to understand the needs your customers have and change ahead of those needs and to give up the equity you have in your old schema in favor of new ones fast enough to continue to be innovative. This will be the big challenge that many of you face. because the landscape is definitely changing. The buyer is more prepared to make purchase decisions than ever before, and they're going to make those decisions faster and in favor of brands that meet their needs based on the brands that are in the consideration set they have. And your job has to be considered, and part of what Feedvisor does is help you be one of the top brands to choose from when they're shopping online at Amazon. So this is a crucial piece of your strategy. Being available becomes also really crucial. As I mentioned, distribution strategy availability is really very important because this buyer has no patience. That's also driven by the impact of the Amazon brand in terms of I can get whatever I want whenever I want it. So you're going to need to be prepared to meet the needs of that buyer, somebody who is capable of accessing your brand anywhere, anytime. So with that in mind, I'd like to summarize with a few specific questions that I think are crucial for you to take home with you. They're the questions that will drive extraordinary performance. If you can get this set of questions correct, you can be a very high-performing brand for a very long time. First, how are you creating uniqueness? The more unique your brand is, the more pricing authority your brand has. Uniqueness drives pricing authority. Again, if you're interested in that topic, I'd point you to Young Mi Moon at Harvard Business School. Next, will you co-create meaningfulness? Meaningfulness will drive sales volume potential. This consumer wants meaning, so do your employees. So make sure you're thinking about being a purposeful, meaningful brand in order to maximize the opportunity. Third, do you have an innovation plan? Have you separated your sustaining innovation from your blue ocean or disrupted innovation? And are you looking through the lens of innovation in a way that's healthy, where you're not doing a one-size-fits-all approach to innovating your service models and innovating your product sets? Fourth, how can you shift your focus on helping rather than closing? If you can help today's consumer, they will reward you with that just-in-time purchase. But it's hard to do because it means being able to predict when they're going to want information and giving them the information and access to the information they want very rapidly. With that in mind, I know that there have probably been some questions. I'd like to invite you to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can go to our website, Millennial Marketing, and read the research. We've written quite a bit about affluent millennials and other retailing topics. I see the vast majority of you are still on the call, so I'd like to turn it over briefly to Ohad and his team to curate a couple questions that I might be able to answer during the time that we have left. I very much appreciate the opportunity to share this with you today. I hope you access the free research on the site, and I hope you're in touch if we can be helpful. Thank you.
Jeff, thank you very, very much. This has been a very interesting session. Actually, this is one of my favorite. I think, and I said it at the beginning, for Amazon sellers, it's important to get out of the Amazon-only box and think of, their consumers. If you're private label, for sure, the products you are bringing products that are relevant for this generation. Before we move to the Q&A, few quick comments about Feedvisor. For those of you who do not know us yet, we are the pioneer in algo commerce, which basically means that we developed a discipline to use big data and machine learning algorithms to make business critical decisions both in pricing and in other areas of your Amazon business. This is something that has been a lot in the news recently. We have been featured in Forbes talking about our artificial intelligence. There has been a recent Wall Street Journal article. You can Google Wall Street Journal article about Amazon sellers and the price fluctuation, and that article featured the Feedvisor CEO, Victor Rosenman, talking about our artificial intelligence solution, as well as one of our clients sharing his point into that story. Leah, can you please move on to the next slide? About Feedvisor solutions, again, I'm going to go very briefly. This is not the reason why we're here, but for those of you who want to learn more, we have 3 solutions in the market. One of them is algorithmic pricing, which is basically a smart repricing solution based on artificial intelligence and machine learning algorithms. A revenue intelligence and reporting dashboard and tools, which, to summarize, the way I like to frame it is we help you guys make better and smarter decisions. This is not just another tool that gives you a report to work with. These are actions that you need to take from, right? So our algorithms analyze, and based on big data, we come up with recommendation, whether it's inventory, replenishment, assortment, or pricing strategies decision. And then the last thing we're giving at Feedvisor, this is actually one of the favorite things that our customers are indicating, is your dedicated success managers, our account managers. These are all people that are specializing in Amazon. They understand Amazon, and we are here for you, not only for the repricer and reports by themselves, but we are partners in your growth. Leah, can you please move on to the next slide? This is just to show you, and this is the last slide before we move to the Q&A. This is just to give you a quick explanation of how Feedvisor algorithm works. So we use big data techniques, and I'm not going to go into details what this means, but to summarize, we collect a lot of data, market data, pricing data for each one of the products that you are repricing on Amazon and then some other marketplaces. We look on the demand for your products. Our algorithms go inside and build demand models for each one of your products. And of course, we look on your competition. It's not only based on yourself, it's a mix of all of these things all together. Then our algorithm does some work on this huge amount of data, and I'm talking about huge amount of data. They define some trends. They understand or forecast where the direction is. And based on that, they're coming with decisions. And then, of course, the outcome is growth. But this process never ends, because for every decision you make, that's more new data that goes into that funnel. And that way, our decisions for you guys are being optimized. We can move on now to the questions. I'm going to put a poll on the screen now. So if you guys want to learn more about Feedvisor, or if you want to get the demo, please go ahead and pick the option in here. If no, there's no need to click on anything. We're going to start with the first question, Jeff. I think we have some few interesting questions, and we have a few minutes to cover them.
Great.
The first question we received during the webinar actually is how our millennial shopping behavior is different than older demographic. And that person was, by the way, asking specifically about electronics. I don't know if you have the information about specifically about electronics, but if not, it's interesting to understand their shopping behavior and how is it differ.
Well, I think electronics is an interesting category, first of all, in the sense that I think that many times the purchaser might be someone like me who's 50 years old, but I'm being influenced by the views of my 20-year-old son. So it's important to understand who's influencing versus who's buying, and many electronic sellers do understand how important that young consumer is, even when they're not the buyer. Having said that, it's very easy for me to get a lot of information on products from a lot of different sources. So to the extent you can do anything to generate ratings and reviews, positive comments from people who've purchased, anything around content before and after the purchase that would cause someone to share information with you. I'm not going to give you my email address for nothing, but if you're going to give me content that would help me better use the electronics items I've purchased, then I'd be willing to exchange my email for better content. But you'd have to prove it. You can't just say we're going to do X. And I think it's important to understand that today's consumer is pretty savvy and can process quite a bit of information. And to treat them that way will be helpful to you. So I hope that answered the question.
Talking about marketing, the question we received is if you have to pick the top 2 or 3 marketing channels and marketing strategies to apply to this generation, what will it be? And my request to you, Jeff, for that answer, you know, these audience have, of course, limited budget, right? It's not multinational brands. So let's avoid answers like a TV campaign or something like that. I don't know. What are the most productive marketing channels and strategies? Let's say call it for small to mid-sized businesses targeting this audience.
Yeah, I think even if you had more money, one of the most important things is going to be content, creating just-in-time content for just-in-time buyers. And content isn't about having a large budget. Content is about using your brain to understand the questions, the issues, the challenges, how you can inspire that buyer. Ideally, you would create content that would be so valuable that consumers would gladly give you their email address in exchange for getting after-purchase information and after-purchase service so that you could actually build a relationship with that customer that goes beyond a transaction. I think that would be very important. that would probably be near the top of my list for the vast majority of brands. And I hope that helps.
Okay, we have one more question here. Do you have an example of a company that has done disruptive innovation and sustaining innovation as well?
Sure. I mean, the companies we work with tend to be a little bigger, but we finished a project recently for Hearst Media. They're doing development on, next gen, 6 months out, improvements in media properties that would be very visible to people. At the same time, we're doing business model innovation that would be very different from current distribution models that are in the marketplace from not only them, but anyone else at all. So the challenge for most companies that do both disruptive and sustaining innovation is you usually need outside help. It's very hard to do these things, to get to the empathy kinds of states and need states. And the best innovation work is done when you have very clear views of need states and empathy states. And then once you get some of that help from an outside company, oftentimes the company can act on then taking those initial ideas and running with them, often without any additional outside help. So that would be a simple example. I can't go into the details of any of our client work, but I think it's important to make sure that you're thinking about these through two different lenses because they are very different.
Okay, so before we move on to the next question, actually my colleague here just reminded me that I forgot to mention that if you are interested in learning more this kind of content, please join us in May in New York, where Feedvisor is hosting our next Amazon Professional Seller Summit. It's going to take place on May 22nd in New York at the Marriott Hotel at Brooklyn. And if you want to learn more about this event, just Google Amazon Professional Seller Summit, New York, May 2017, and you'll get to our landing page. We still have early bird pricing available, so you can save $200 on the ticket price. Moving on to the next question. This is actually relevant to me as well. One of the guys here is mentioning that he's managing two millennials. He has two millennials on the team, and he's asking, what's the best approach you should take to managing millennials?
So, millennial employees are also millennial consumers, so they have a thirst for adventure. They want purposeful brands. They don't respond well to command and control structures that are autocratic in nature, which means if you're a manager who's been managing for 20, 30, 40 years, you're going to need to change your style and meet them at least halfway. They're looking for more collaborative work environments, and they're looking for the opportunity to participate and add value at a very younger age. And I have colleagues who are very talented who have, been able to dive in and help even when they're 23 and 24. So I think you need to expect more, you need to listen more, and you need to collaborate more as opposed to a structure that is, I will tell you what we are going to do. They also want coaching. They do like coaching. So if you have a review process that doesn't occur at least 4 to 6 times a year, where you're going to provide informal feedback to that associate on an ongoing basis, and your process is more of a once-a-year review or something like that, that'll not be sufficient for them. They're going to want more feedback more frequently.
Here's a question that just arrived now. For after-purchase relationship, which one do you think is the best strategy for millennials? Personalized content, promotion, or brand storytelling and engagement?
That's a tough question. I would generally say personalized content is going to be very effective because I think it's going to be hard to have a pricing strategy that works to really drive an outcome that's sustainable beyond what the company's already done to pull that customer in. And content can be very valuable as a sharing tool for the buyer to the friends of the buyer who could be buyers as well. So I would think hard about the content strategy side of it probably more than anything else. We know price matters. I didn't say price doesn't matter. It's just there's a bandwidth that's usually fairly narrow by which most brands have to be in that bandwidth where they can make money and the consumer's interested in being outside the bandwidth fails for one party or the other.
There's actually great solutions in the market to help you guys get your customers to generate content for you, whether it's reviews or social media or other channels. There's great solutions in the market. You guys can Google it and find of companies that do a great job with user-generated content. And if you guys do it correctly, you're in good shape, right? You have an army of advocates that work for you generating that content. Jeff, we're going to end up this webinar with one last question. Quick one. Top main difference you see between generations buying, right? So the baby boomers, X generation and Y generation. How would you describe the big difference? What's the biggest difference between these groups?
Sure. We have a new report on Gen Z. The Gen Z consumer is an old soul in a young body. They're teenagers. They're very social. They're very digital. They're very mobile, but they're much more traditional in their values. Millennials are the adventurers, and they want to take in everything life has to offer. I think that the baby boomers are going to look more like younger generation, the Gen Z consumer, but they're not going to be nearly as digital, social, or mobile because they didn't grow up with that kind of technology. So they're going to be a little more traditional, and they're likely to be a little less comfortable with technology. Having said that, there's a percentage of older consumers who are seeing the advantages of this mobile-first culture, this consumer who's able to, do things that they were never able to do, and they're starting to change. So we are seeing more and more buyers who are paying with their smartphones, who are doing things that we didn't know that they would do. So I think it's important to understand that there's an evolution going on, and many of the trends that we see with consumers who are in their 20s are now being more commonly adopted even by consumers in their 40s and 50s.
Right. Okay, Jeff. So thank you very, very much for joining us today on this webinar. This has been an extremely interesting session, and I'm sure many of the attendees have learned new things. This is not a unique webinar we are doing. So thank you very, very much. As Jeff mentioned, yeah, there's information there available if you guys have any questions. And if you want to learn more about Feedvisor and you didn't have a chance to click on that links we had before, feel free to email us at info@feedvisor.com. I repeat, info@feedvisor.com. And have a great rest of the day. Thank you very much, Jeff.
Thank you.